On the 29th of April 1945, a number of German guards who worked inside of the Dachau concentration camp were gathered together by American forces who liberated the camp. What those liberators came across was pure harrowing, with the corpses of thousands of concentration camp prisoners being found all over the Dachau site. But those SS members and guards would be some of the last who would be executed at the camp, which became known for its torture and barbaric treatment of inmates. There were many reprisals carried out against the guards of the camps once the sites were liberated, as former prisoners rose up to attack the men and women who had made their lives a misery and who had inflicted execution and torture on a daily basis. But the crimes of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals and the massacre of the SS guards and also prisoner functionaries were investigated, but very little was done about what had happened, and many saw this as justice for the crimes carried out at Dachau. Join us today as we look at the disturbing crime of the Dachau Liberation Massacre, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Dachau concentration camp opened on the 22nd of March 1933, and it was the first concentration camp that was planned to hold political prisoners and dissidents to begin with, but then as the Second World War erupted, thousands of other people found themselves sent there. It grew to a huge complex which was served by around 100 subcamps, and thousands of Jewish people were sent to Dachau. The prisoners were forced to work incredibly hard, and they would be executed if they did not, or they were subjected to punishment and torture ordeals, such as the standing cells. The prisoners were closely guarded, and some guards shot prisoners without no reason or justification, almost for sport. The guards also stole the inmates' caps and threw them into no man's land, so when the prisoners went to retrieve them, near to the fence, the guards in the watchtowers shot them. Beatings were regular also at Dachau, and some inmates were beaten to death, and horrific torture methods as mentioned were also used. Prisoners were regularly strung up by their arms if they were found to have breached the rules, and the SS also used a firing range found nearby to execute prisoners who were said to have not been fit enough to work. They also used gallows to hang prisoners in front of others at roll call. But as World War II continued, the prisoners of Dachau rose in their numbers, and in the final months of the war the conditions at Dachau were even more tragic as they had ever been. But the Allies were pushing hard towards Germany, in the heart of the Nazi regime, and they were stumbling across a number of concentration camps, and what they found was pure horror. There was in the final days a severe lack of food at Dachau, and also disease, and there was little to no water for the hugely overcrowded site, and many of the SS guards had begun to try to flee and save their skin, and to prevent being taken to a war crimes tribunal. Prisoners arrived at Dachau even on the 19th of April 1945, and it was within a number of days that the Americans were driving deep into Bavaria, and Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, then agreed to turn the camp over to the Allies. Days before the Americans got to the camp, the commandant of the site, along with his guards, force-marched 7,000 prisoners, and anyone who could not keep up was shot dead, and mass graves containing over 1,000 prisoners were found. On the 29th of April 1945, soldiers of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, and the 45th Infantry Regiment, who were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, were close to Dachau. They found 39 railway boxcars, containing over 2,000 bodies inside, and they found bodies scattered everywhere. There were emaciated corpses all over the place, and as the soldiers moved deeper towards the main camp, they found more death. It was said that the stench of death was overpowering, and Dachau's commandant had already ran off with a number of his former guards. His assistant, Heinrich Vicker, was in charge of the camp, and it was surrendered then to the Allies. One liberator said of this that, as we approached the southwest corner, 3 people came forward with a flag of truce. We met them about 75 yards north of the southwest corner. These 3 people were a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Maurer, and 2 SS troopers, who said they were the camp commander and his assistant. They had come here on the night of the 28th to take over from the regular camp personnel for the purpose of surrendering the camp to the advancing Americans. The Swiss Red Cross representative said there were around 100 SS guards in the camp who had their arms stacked except for the people in the tower. He had given instructions that there were to be no shots fired, and it would take about 50 men to relieve the guards. As there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected, he asked if I were an officer. I replied, I am Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division, and will accept the surrender of the camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the United States Army. But the Supreme Allied Commander Eisenhower would later report about the liberation of Dachau that our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp at Dachau. Approximately 32,000 prisoners were liberated, 300 SS camp guards were quickly neutralised. But with this he was making reference to the massacre of SS guards that was still at Dachau. The Americans, who were shocked and horrified by what they saw, wanted to enact some revenge upon the SS guards. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks spoke of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, and he claimed that 50 German prisoners who had been captured were gathered in an area of the site used for storing coal. This area was enclosed by a masonry wall, and the POWs were guarded by a machine gun team. As Sparks left the area, a soldier shouted, "They're trying to get away," and machine gun fire was then heard. Sparks found a 19-year-old soldier at the gun, and he kicked him away from this, and he then saw 12 dead SS guards and many more who were crying in pain. The gunner himself was crying, and he said they were trying to escape. Sparks said of this that it was a foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. There were many more reprisal killings that took place at the site, and one historian later claimed that dozens of Germans were killed on the orders of another lieutenant in a mass execution hours after the initial incident involving the machine gun. He also claimed that Sparks was correct when he saw 15 or 16 dead SS officers lying next to the wall having been hit by the machine gun bullets. Another account stated some of the Nazis were rounded up and executed along with the guard dogs. According to a German historian, it was claimed that 16 SS were shot, 17 were shot dead in Tower B, and a few more were killed by the US soldiers in reprisal shootings. Anywhere from between 25 to 50 were also killed by the inmates. Some SS guards had been captured as they were trying to flee the camp, and some were then shot after being involved in a shootout. But some prisoners also went on the attack. One witness of this said, "Prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed one or two prisoners out of the way, but the courage of the prisoner mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed." Prisoner functionaries and carpos were also massacred, and some American soldiers turned a blind eye to the inmates beating the guards to death. But an official investigation was later carried out by the American Army to investigate what specifically happened in the moments following the liberation of the camp. More reprisal killing was discovered, as it was found that near to the back entrance of the camp, commander of I Company, Lieutenant William Walsh, shot 4 Germans who surrendered in a boxcar, and then a private climbed into the boxcar and gave them a coup de grace gunshot to the wounded. SS members were separated from prisoners, and then some of these were walked to a separate part of the camp, and they were then shot. But when Dachau was liberated, it was obvious that a number of former guards had been executed by the revengeful Americans. There would have been revenge in the minds of these soldiers, as they'd been heavily affected by what they discovered and by what they found with the slaughter that had occurred. It's easy to see why the Americans would have wanted to carry out some justice for themselves and the inmates, and that the liberators were disturbed by the treatment of the prisoners. Many of the guards who surrendered succumbed to revenge killings, but one thing to consider is that these men were technically prisoners of war once they had surrendered, meaning that technically, in the eyes of the rulebook, the Dachau Liberation Reprisals were actually a war crime. There was little to no punishment organised regarding the perpetrators of the killing, including the young soldier behind the machine gun, and also those who shot prisoners of war. At the end of the Second World War, there were many accounts of German war criminals being executed on gallows, such as Landsberg Prison, for the shooting of prisoners of war. But little ever emerged regarding the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, and it was kept very quiet in the aftermath of the war, despite different investigations taking place. There were different court-martials considered for those involved, but these charges were ultimately dismissed by General George S. Patton. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, Please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.